episode of the Bladeology podcast. We're going to jump into this like we do every week. We've got a special episode for you. We're on with a guest. My name is Jeremiah Burbank from PVK, and I'm on today with Nick from NCC Knives. Nick, are you there?
Yep.
Awesome. And our guest today is Nick from Menevade Knives. Nick, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Happy to have you on. It's a long time coming. We're excited for this. So let's jump into this. Tell us, do a little background. How did you get into knife making? How did you get into the knife industry? How did it all start?
So I think it's with a lot of people, everyone has a proclivity towards weaponry, whether it's growing up with, play with sticks and, in my generation, it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So, as I got older, I started collecting some frost cutlery knives here and there. And then around when I went to college is kind of when I decided I wanted to actually buy something with a little bit of quality. And so I was kind of searching on the internet. I came across like Spyderco. And at that time, I actually got really into karambits. So, I tried, being a broke college student, I couldn't really afford a Spyderco karambit. And so I settled for some other brand. I forgot what. I think it's I think it was like a Mantis knives. And so, and it basically started from there. At the time I was in school for engineering, and the two disciplines kind of go hand to hand with material science and stuff. So essentially, I found a community, on Blade forums and Jersey Devils, and basically joined that and slowly kind of learned more about the industry and knives in general and all the different brands, all the custom knife makers. And after graduating is kind of when I really got immersed into the community and started talking to a lot of custom knife makers.
Okay, so you dove right into the forum world. That's kind of the way to do it. That must have been sort of the heyday of blade forums. What year are we looking at there approximately?
Like 2010.
So I met you fresh out of college then.
Nick, I don't remember when we first met.
I just know it was either I think it was 2010 or it's probably 2011.
Do you know if Wieners is Steel had been created yet?
No, not yet. Because my first Nix was 2009, and I didn't meet anybody. In 2010, I just met Gapco and Jeff, so we probably met in 2011. And you had the only large folder you made based off a Poltergeist design.
Yes.
I think I might have met you either through Mike or I think we were just walking around and I recognized that design from an IG post because I was following you.
We probably met at New York Custom Knife Show.
Yeah, that's where we met, but I don't remember if it was through Mike or I just recognized that folder you were working on through something. It was probably Blade forums or USN forums. It was before the times of the IG.
The world was much smaller back then, so I think with Jeff and Gavco, Tough Thumbs, were hanging around. Everybody kind of gathered and started, talking shop.
So you met at Nick's at New York Custom Knife Show.
Yep, the Nick's met at Nick's.
Yeah, right. So that's a trifecta. So you had had something that you were working on already. So when did you make the transfer from sort of interested collector to maker?
So I was a little bit slow. So I was part of, I don't know if I would be considered part of, but I was there when Jeff and Gavco kind of rose to fame by producing a lot of YouTube content, and Jeff from Tough Thumbs would do a lot of custom work, whether it's like bead blasting, doing stonewash finish on the blades and making custom scales, or doing some regrinds. I think at that time, at least early on, he didn't do so much of that. He was just more focused on the custom scale work, and that caught my eye because I thought the Anzo pattern on the G10 handles is like the coolest thing ever. So,
Everybody did in the early 2010s.
everybody did, yeah, and then just everyone's raving just how cool it was, especially when Jeff like blasted it with bead blast to give it that nice even texture, because a lot of people would just do it with Dremel, such as myself. And then, then it obviously became a little bit more complex. People started doing liners, and then some people started doing, titanium scale work. And at that time, I also came up with my own pattern, which is basically like a slight variation of the Enzo pattern. I think I call it like the leatherback pattern.
I forgot you used to do as they said, pimp knives, and then you made that Poltergeist looking folder.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like, I think even, like I said, Jeff started there. Mike from Gavco started making sheaths. So I was able to kind of learn a little bit about how to make sheaths through his videos. And, what's his face? Jacob of Poltergeist Works just started creating some really, well put together. It's like a 4-part series of how he makes his knives from start to finish. So you get to see his entire process of how he does it. He does everything by hand, for the most part. And so, and Matt Christensen too was also pimping knives too. So a lot of us were just starting off at that point.
Dremels and G10.
Dremels and G10 respirator. That's basically just a ton of dust as a result of it. So, so I started off that, because that was kind of like where the sort of interest was, and kind of like it was much easier to get into that because you just basically spent like $20 on a Dremel and just buy some G10 and a drill press, and then you're set to go. So you could earn a little bit of cash from that, and then it slowly worked up to the way of investing into a grinder, and then eventually making your first folder. So at that time I only had a 1x30 from Harbor 1x30 grinder from Harbor Freight, which was probably the most difficult thing to try to grind on, because they had no tracking whatsoever, and it's so volatile with the overheat. So
it started with some Harbor Freight gear and some modifying of some G10. What was a knife that you would have been modifying back then?
I did some Emersons. I did a lot of Spydercos. And I think that's pretty much, that's all that could really come to mind. I know Terra Fanatic has sent me quite a few Spydercos. I did that for him. And zero tolerance knives.
Yeah, the assisted delete, which was just pulling out that spring.
Yeah. So did a lot of that. At least a lot of, so Jeff from Tough Thumbs did like these. He's known for making the Anzo patterns and doing those cool designs. And so with my approach, I wanted to do a little bit different, just to not to copy him. And so I did a little bit more artistry with my designs. I did more like hand carving with the Dremel. And so I have pictures of like me doing like a glacier pattern, like skulls. I think.
Oh, I remember what was the first thing I saw from you. Thinking about carving now. you did a koi fish that you inlaid that plastic with aluminum mesh. I forgot what it's called. You remember that one? It was a Techno, I think.
Yeah, I saw. That was my old personal Spyderco Techno, and so I had some black and blue layered G10, and then we had what was that material called? It was super popular. It was a honeycomb. It was a I think it was a heat sink aluminum honeycomb mesh. And what they would do is pour resin into it, and then so it created this honeycomb pattern when you grind it, with the resin and the aluminum.
Yeah,
And
I've seen that. Yeah, with the mesh patterns, and they do like trippy like resin colors in it.
yeah, yeah. So I used that to basically. I had an orange piece because they were giving away samples at the time, and so I had an orange piece. I basically carved out a koi fish to emulate the scales, and put that into my knife. But I've done things a little bit more intricate. So I did take Moon Glow, which is this highly vibrant glow in the dark material, and what I did was I glued on black G10, and then I carved out Keith Haring like designs on all across the handle, and I did that for a Spyderco. Was it Pingo? Nick, do you remember what knife that was? The one that looks like a weird little hawkbill shape, but it's curvy.
No,
With a
I
ball
just
lock.
clearly remember your Techno. Oh, with the ball lock, yeah. It's like the cricket. I forgot, but yeah, it's something like a Pingo.
So I did for a few months. I did that before I started getting into knife making.
So what was it that pushed you from customization into just a sole authorship, and you were like, okay, like this is something I want to do? Was it a design? Was it a lack of something in the market that you couldn't find, so you wanted to build it yourself?
So it kind of fell back into, so back then lock rock was like an issue. I remember people complaining like at the time their Strider would have lock rock, or over time their ZT would end up developing lock rock. So being in engineering school, I kind of looked into it, and I realized that the sort of wear on the lock face, like the geometry was set weirdly, so that there's this aspect called moment, which is the sort of direction which the forces want to kind of go towards. And so if the moment is steering like almost perpendicular to the lock bar, it just basically meant that it's constantly like flexing your lock bar inward, and that constant opening, closing, and the titanium is, it's relatively soft. And this is before they started creating lock bars with stainless steel hardened lock face insert. They would just, eventually wear in to the point where there's a bit of a gap. And so that's when the lock rock would happen. And at times people were complaining that with enough force or a spine whack, the blade would actually close in on you. And so there was a lot of sort of hyper scrutinization, hyper focus on that. And so, I found that if you were to kind of have the point of lock a little bit higher, what that causes the moment to go towards inward of the bar, which ends up causing the bar to kind of flex. So I at that time wanted to make a knife that would basically not have lock rock, and that's what started it all.
So okay, so you entered the field with a problem to solve on your mind. I like that. You were like, okay, I want to conquer this issue. So the lock insert, that's a whole other conversation that we're probably not going to get into tonight. So after all these years, insert or no insert?
For the longevity, you could definitely get away more with the insert.
Okay. All right. Okay, so you went in and you said, "All right, I want to make a knife with no lock rock." And what was that? What was that first one? Tell me a little bit about that. How did that look?
That first one was a Warncliffe knife that I called the Forerunner, and Nick is right in the sense that it was very. So I took a lot of my inspiration from Jacob from Poltergeist works. I really like his very clean look and almost minimalistic approach to the design of his knives, and so I made something very similar where I use like a 3/16 inch,
Chainring bolt.
No, that was the 3/16 for the pivot, and then a 3/8 for the chainring bolt for the back, and that acted as also a screw point for the pocket clip, which I don't know how I ended up making that since I didn't even have a butane torch. So yeah.
So I also remember this one part. You were talking about locks, and you were talking about rediverting it around the pivot. Weren't you working with Chavez on that?
I think it was like our first or second Blade show. And we met Ramon from Chavez Knives, and I knew at that time he was only making fixed blades, and so he really was inspired by the amount. I was just like first show that he went to, like prior to that. I think he really only sold knives to local people or friends he knew, and so somehow he got in touch with the people over at Knife Thursday, and they brought him over to Blade Show, and he was so like inspired and so opened up, like he had no idea this thing existed, and so from there you could tell that he really wanted to make a folder. So I tried to give him some pointers, and I told him that, like, if you have your, because one of the things that he meant, one of his requirements was that he didn't want the blade to fail at any point. And so I had advised him that, for me, with a few exceptions, I only buy knives when the lock face is at the locking point is very similar to my approach for making knives. And so he decided to go with that approach, and he still goes to it to this day. So if you look at his, like, basically, if you look at his knives and look next to a Chris Reed knives, the lockup is completely different in terms of where it is. And he hasn't called me up and said, "Hey Nick, your idea was totally horrible. I ran into so many issues, like I'm changing my lock." He hasn't called me about something like that, so I assume it works. It works in my own knives.
I remember he made the first 10, and they were all hand marked with like 1, 2, 3-5. You guys all got the first 10.
Yeah, I still have mine. Yeah, he made those at a 3V steel. So I think, yeah. So
you were pretty instrumental in some of the first Chavez custom folders. Can we say that?
I would say
lock geometry wise.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, there's the terminology. Yeah, I would say that I provided some insight and some guidance with the lock geometry, and it would appear that Ramon hasn't changed his lock geometry since he started making his first folder.
Well, that's pretty cool, man. I mean, I think that's definitely that's a good feather in the cap in the way that we go. So you were saying that was your like second Blade show?
It was either first or second Blade show. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. What year? I know I'm going to keep hammering on that. What year approximately do you think that might have been? Just for point of reference.
Probably 2012.
Okay. All right. So at that point, you kind of had your concept that worked for your lock geometry, so you knew it was working. At that exact point, how many I mean, you must have had a few custom knives under your belt at that point.
Yeah, I think I only made. I only made 10 knives at that time. I think they were the first generation stubs, which it's kind of like my flagship knife. It's really just an overbuilt little mini flipper folder, and the name stub stands for short tonto utility blade. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Oh, love it. Throwing those acronyms in there. Okay.
yeah. So
All right.
that was the first one that I did, and the first 10 was well received. I was able to do them in different colors. So I think it was like two tan G10s, two of them in green G10, one purple, one jade, and then I think the other two pairs were black and orange. So
Nice. Okay, so you had this original sort of Warncliffe Poltergeist model, and how did we transition from that into the stub? How did you get into the stub mindset, the design and the functionality of that piece, which is your flagship?
So at that time, I was still grinding with the 1x30, and just the 1x30. If anybody's ever used it, it's just like I said, it's very volatile with the speed and the belt. You can't track it in any way, even if you try to create some fixtures to align the belt. And so it just seemed like it was very impractical for me to try to grind a Warncliffe since I didn't have the right tools. And so at the time I was experimenting, and I just was, I was kind of stuck with the tools that I had. So I started making a little folder as a result. And so that was how I was able to make essentially the first prototype stub. So that was made on the 1x30, as well as the first 10 first gen stubs.
Okay, so you were kind of the tools helped direct some of the design there.
Yeah. The constraints of what I had to work with is what ultimately led me down that path.
Okay, and the Tanto is just a preferred blade shape, or that sort of that fit the style.
Yeah. So again, it's based around the concept of just having utility usage, and since at my day job, I'm constantly opening packages. I found that I don't need like a large 3-inch blade. I really just need a sharp point, because I'm not cutting open boxes. I'm just really just splicing the tape, in which is holding the box together, and I could then just pry it open from there. And so the Tonto made the most sense in terms of having longevity and multi-use, just because it's got essentially two tips. And so that's kind of why I lean towards the Tonto.
Do you want to share with us what your day job is?
So my day job, I'm a production manager at I won't say on here, but if anyone wants to look it up, they'll find out on LinkedIn. And basically, it's a tea manufacturing company. And so that's sort of our bread and butter, just tea manufacturing. We bring it in from all over the world, Japan, China, India, South Africa, wherever there's, different types of tea you could, we bring it from there. And then just recently, after the pandemic, we started two sister sites that we sell spices and coffee. And so, job security's been very good. It's very, very busy there.
There you go. No, that's excellent. Okay. And okay, so the stub it's right. It's that short Tanto. Talk to me about overall size a little bit. So I mean, right. So 1x30, you have a small blade with a small handle. But it has it always been the size it is now? Has it grown? Has it shrunk? Do you just prefer sort of a smaller? I would consider the stub a watch pocket knife. Is that off base?
Yeah. So that's a great way of describing it. So I wanted to. It's a little bit different now, but I've always had a sort of resistance to just make a pocket clip. I think it's just it's just I did again. It's really back to the tooling. I didn't have the right tools. I couldn't 3D mill pocket clips. It was difficult to tap titaniums. And so, and then when it came to, wire clips, those are also very difficult. I didn't have a die setup or, the right equipment to bend titanium. So I just really wanted to make a folder that really fit into your little watch pocket in your jeans. And so because of that profile, the blade could never really be more than I think 2 inches, 2.25 inches. And so the first two generation stubs were about, I think, 1.75 inch length blades. And then it wasn't until the third generation did I decide to size it up a little bit more to about 2.25. That pocket was what was like sort of the driving constraints for limiting the size of the stub overall. And then obviously the handle would be designed around, enclosing that blade in the closed position.
You're mentioning different variations and versions. What, I would say two parts. What generation of the stub are we on / buffering that? How many generations have there been thus far?
We're on the third generation still. And there's also a sub variant called the Stub Light, spelled Lite, sort of like Bud Light. And so that one is actually all chisel ground. All the light versions are all chisel ground, and at the moment we're in generation 2 for those. But the original sub are both double-sided ground blades, with the exception for the first generation. Gen 2 and Gen 3 are hollow ground blades with a V tip.
That's also around the time where we actually became friends outside of just seeing each other at shows, because that's when I used to sublet space from New Jersey Steel Baron, and you used to come by every couple of months and just go to the grinder and just grind out batches of blades because you refused to buy a real grinder.
Yes. So at that time when I made the Gen 2, I still did not have a real grinder. so
I used to come by and steal my grind time.
Yeah. So Pete, not only that, this is a great segue into the Sun. No, Pete was very nice to kind of help me out with the steel, and then again just introduced me to the shop. And what a surprise! Nick is right there working on his own stuff, and so yes, we shared it. We shared some of it. We shared. Was that your grinder, Nick, or was that NJ Steelberry's grinder?
Half of them were mine, half of them were theirs. But you were bouncing. Okay. You would set up each of the grinders with different operations the guy was setting up because of the Tanto tip and whatnot. And you would just come in after work and just be there all night. Oh, I'm working on the mill, and you're just around the grinder. I'm like, I guess I ain't grinding tonight.
Yeah. It kind of, Jeremiah, it really shows you sort of the friendships and generosity of some people. Because Pete would let me grind there till midnight alone, and I would close up shop. So, he trusted me to just stay there on my own and not do anything shady. So, I'm forever grateful for that trust.
No, that is legit. It's like the Steel Baron was almost like a knife maker incubator for a little while. It seems like
halfway home for degenerates, more like.
So, since you had mentioned variations, there was when I was making the Gen 2, there was questions about whether I would make a fixed blade of some sort. And so at the time I was bouncing off ideas, and I created the thing called the Stun, which is short Tondo utility necker, which again is me playing pun off the word stub. I just changing the last one to from B to the letter N. And so it's a fixed blade, which is technically a neck knife, which I still make them now, and I'm sure people are wondering why I include a ball chain in it, even though I've marketed that it could be mounted on with a belt clip and onto your backpack. But to go back to what Nick was saying, which is hogging his grind time. When I made the first batch of the first generation stuns, I had actually asked him. By then, I actually had purchased my own grinder. And so I had asked him if I could borrow his wheel, and I would take it home for
Yeah,
the night.
he would just come in and take my tools and like, okay, I'll be back with this later. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm not grinding for 2 or 3 days.
And I try to be very considerate because, again, Nick letting me borrow his wheel was him letting me save a few $100s in buying equipment that I either didn't have the cash flow yet or...
To be frank, it was a $150 wheel.
I know.
He would come back week after week. I was like, just get one. It's not that crazy.
Yeah. To be fair, I think I just started working there at my current company, so then I was able to make some money. But again, to be considerate, I actually ground all, I think, 50 blades in one night. I just
oh wow,
I stayed up to 2 a.m. I'm like, I gotta get it done, because the next morning I got to drop it back off to Nick. So
let's see. So we get the stub, we get the stun. So at this point, you're definitely right. So you've got multiple models. Let's talk a little bit about not necessarily revenue, but avenues of sales. So you've got the stub. What was your first? I mean, are we doing drops at Nick's? Are we doing dealer sales, private sales on the internet? How did that? Tell me a little bit about how that works.
Logistically, I never tried to attempt to do private sales, simply because I try to standardize the overall build. I didn't dabble too much in Damascus, or Damascus. Those exotic materials were, they were very expensive, and it didn't work well. So I sort of was adopting practices from my day job, which is you buy in bulk and then you try to be as efficient as you can with production. So whenever I did runs, I would buy sheets of steel at a time and then send them out to Waterjet to be cut, and then just process those blades. And so what was most efficient was to do pre-orders and then final invoicing through my website, and then whatever was left over from the run, I would make it available on the website to purchase. I have sold some to dealers, Knife Center, Blade HQ have been 2 prominent ones. Urban ETC there's also been another one. So and then just recently, I started doing business with Blue Ridge Knives. So.
Oh wow. Okay. That's pretty serious.
Just starting, we're testing the waters, so yeah.
All right. Well, that's great. I mean, those are sort of you've got 2 big ones in there and sort of the mid-size, and then Blue Ridge is giant. So congratulations on that. Or still, I should say still, this is all domestic, right? I mean, you're not outsourcing anything. This is all you.
Yeah, it's just one man operation, from design to picking up parts to packaging and shipping them out. Everything in between it's all done by me.
The stun, the fixed blade. I think, and then correct me if I'm wrong, there was a version, or maybe it was always the version, but I remember a version that was sort of an extendo version. That sort of the frame or the handle of the stun got bigger. Can we talk a little bit about how that happened?
The one that you're talking about is actually the second generation.
Okay.
The first generation was actually much smaller, much shorter, and it was a literal fixed blade. There was nothing. It was just the steel, the inserted finger ring, and then 2 scales on the side, which Nick helped me machine early on when I was making my first batch.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. And so the second generation one now, a lot of people were talking about, they were having difficulty sort of putting their grip on it, and to try to accommodate that, what I did was, I put a lanyard hold there, and, at the time, a lot of people would like to make their own lanyard weaves, just for added purchase with their dives. And so that kind of was able to provide some level of stability and utility in holding the stud. But I wanted to try to explore something a little bit more mechanical. So the Generation 2 features a extendable handle that uses a button lock to lock in place, and you could also use it for collapsing the handle. And so that basically gives the user options to it actually gives them a few sort of variations on how to use the knife. The knife again uses a finger ring insert, and the idea for that is for quick deployment, so people could just pull it off their sheath and then just cut whatever they need to cut. Using the tip. If it's a packaging or it's opening up boxes, it's relatively quick, and then they can put it back. If they're engaging in something that requires a little bit more handwork, that's when the handle is able to extend outwards. They can get a full grip without putting their hand in the finger ring hole. They can actually grip it around, and then that's how they're able to use it. And I provided jipping on top to add with sort of, stabilization and friction of holding the knife.
Nice. Okay, that's pretty neat. I think that's probably the Gen 2 is when I kind of tuned in, because I saw that and I was like, that's really neat. It's like a little, yeah, definitely a little more mechanical, like extendo knife, which I thought was pretty cool with the incorporation of the button in there. So that's the logical version 2, right? A little bit bigger, but also a little bit smaller if that's what you prefer.
Yeah. It's one person said it's a grower, not a shower. So,
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So. That works. That works for sure. So your market, you have constantly been making this, right? I mean, have you taken, you do batches, you take breaks? I mean, it sounds like you're sort of, would you consider yourself part-time or full-time is kind of where I'm getting at.
I would consider myself part-time,
Okay.
And the most efficient way for me to do things with my part-time, again, I have a full-time job, and we have, I'm getting older, so we have social family obligations, so, part-time, I would consider myself part-time, and, doing batches is just the most efficient way of me getting things done in a timely manner. Even if it takes a year, so
There you go.
I did this past year I did take a bit of a break after the latest stun run. I was sort of burnt out just because I think I was doing that while doing the stuff as a whole is another variation, which we could dive into if you want. And then I was also doing the stub light Gen 2 dives.
So the light is the chisel ground, right?
The light is the chisel ground, yeah.
So is that like a traditional chisel grind, or like I should say like an Emerson chisel grind, or like the actual, like the proper side to have the chisel on? If it's a right-handed knife, which side is it?
Yeah, it's a traditional chisel knife. So the if it's a right-handed blade, the grind is on the opposite side.
That's always a tricky one with the chisels. Like it's supposed to look good in pictures, or it's supposed to actually chisel. That's the the trick.
Yeah.
Now was the light, was that for you, or did you have people who were like, hey, I would love a stub with a chisel grind? Was it sort of just trying it out?
It was I was trying it out. I was trying to make a little bit cheaper, less labor intensive variant of the stub because it's a hollow grind and it's a combo grind, it's a hollow and V grind. Those operations take time, especially when I'm working on making sure they're even, the plunges it's nice and clean. So those things take quite a bit of time. So it was just, again, if you were to just do one side, you're basically reducing your operations down by half. So I wanted to make something a little less labor intensive, and just make it easier to build. And so that's why the light was created. And the first generation is actually made with G10 that I had machined like in house. I would do it while I'm grinding. So I would, try to stack as much work being done in the same hour to try to get them out. If for what it was for the first run, it was it was a great run. It was a great learning curve, and you know. And so the second one, I actually outsourced to a local shop to machine out of aluminum, just simply because some of the stuff that I learned with the first run, the operations were the tolerances weren't easy to keep, and so I figured it'd just be easier to have a machine shop, take care of those those difficulties, with a larger machine than if I were to do it in house again.
Something that we sort of graze over, but I wanted to jump back on the stub over the generations. Are they're frame locks, they're liner locks, they're either or? Have you done both?
Done both. So the stubs are always going to be frame locks. The stub lights, on the other hand, are liner locks.
I guess the answer might be obvious because it's on the light, but which one do you prefer? Do you like the frame lock? Do you like the liner lock for any other reason?
I think I like frame locks better. I think, aesthetically the liner locks look prettier, a little bit more finished. But with the frame locks, I think, I value the strength of the knife versus, aesthetics.
All right. And so the stub is actually moving into another generation. Do you want to jump into that? We're going into, you have to remind me which generation it is now, but I think that you were going to incorporate a button in there, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that would be in a separate category in its own.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, I've never worked with a button system before, and so and because it could qualify as an automatic knife. I think requires a different acronym name. So,
okay,
yeah,
all right.
Currently, it's stab. That's a work in progress of a name.
Or like Staub, like Saab, like the car brand. So so this is a project that Nick. I think Nick, you approached me on it.
Yeah, so I think this is where I start talking. So the stab, the sab, sob, whatever you want to call it at the moment. It's a project I approached Nick about just because at that time I was getting into autos. As we talked about in the prior episodes, the whole reason I'm no longer in New York. But I had a lot of other stuff going on, and I needed a way to do the first one with minimal fixturing. And so I approached Nick about it because I wanted to do it as a Cali legal. So I just do it a lot faster. It'll be cheaper for prototyping. I went through a lot of prototypes to make sure that the button lock and automatic and everything worked. So I told Nick that I'm planning on taking my MK1 and turning it into a Cali legal. But that'll just make it look exactly like a stub. So I was like, do you want to just do this project with me? That way I could I have two minds on it, two people working on it. I could just machine the parts, make sure it works perfectly. Don't have to make complicated fixtures if I don't need to fully machine the blade or hand grind the blade. So I approached Nick about it. I was like, if I do this, it's just gonna look like one of your knives, except an auto. What do you think? At the same time, Nick was busy with work and he didn't have time to pursue another one of his own full projects. So just the timing kind of worked, and we decided to do it. And I worked out the whole mechanism. He gave me the files for his, so I guess the most recent gen of stub because it was larger, and I changed the proportions a little bit more to get the mechanism to fit in there. And then, as I always do to Tantos, I added a harpoon to it, and that's how that collab started. Machined all the parts, and then gave them to Nick. As he said, he took a hiatus for a little over a year. So I was waiting for him to grind those blades, and I finally started getting those in here now, and we're in the assembly phase on those. I have some parts out currently that need to be black oxide coated, so it matches a little bit better. But it was definitely a fun project. It definitely works, and I think it's going to be something unique to the Cali legal market, as it feels like a full-size knife, and yet it is not. And it also has a really good blade to handle ratio, which I find every Cali legal on the market fails to achieve. They usually add a half inch to the handle, so that way it's easier to grip. But then you get this very unaesthetic blade to handle ratio when you do so. Where with this design, we're able to keep it the exact ratios as the frame lock, and pretty much almost a 1-to-1, as you would say.
I think if we right, so we saw a little bit of a teaser when you brought that to the most recent New York Custom Knife Show. So there's a little bit of a visual leak on the internet there, but so what are we looking at as far as build cosmetics? Build timeline might be a little stretch, but tell us a little bit about material choices and finishes. What can we look forward to?
So we went with, at the time, it was easier to get because this project started, I guess 3 years ago at this point. My brain for timelines has been skewed as I have been out of New York for a year come next month. So I'm going to just say 3 just because of my timelines being messed up at the moment. But it was easier to get CTS XHP at the time. Now it's known as the Extinct Steel.
Yeah, at the time I was purchasing steel for a separate project, and so there was an opportunity to just buy the sheet along with it and save a little bit on shipping. And so I think that's what we did. That it was just picked. It was the most ideal steel at the time to use because of availability.
And so it's a steel that I used primarily at the time, and so did Nick. So
this first run is going to be XHP.
it's going to be XHP, and then you'll never see it again because as of last month, Carpenter officially discontinued it. And not because it's bad, it's just Carpenter doesn't. It's not a knife making steel company. It's an automotive metallurgy company. So they just decided to stop making it and concentrate on what they actually do.
Yeah, it probably makes sense. It was probably not a huge part of their bottom line. Was not blade steel for pocket knives. Okay, so we got CTS XHP blade steel, and what about? I'm assuming aluminum for the handle materials.
Yep, they're standard orientation for automatics. You would see it's aluminum handles. The first batch is just blue and black. 2-piece construction where there is no backspacer, where the handles are the backspacer is integrated half thickness into either handle. 3D pocket clip and custom pivots, and they're all hand ground with a compound hollow grind by Nick, well, the other Nick.
Metamade. Gotcha. Okay. All right. So that's very exciting. So we've got I'm assuming 6061, right? T6 for the handle.
6061, maybe some 7075 versions in the future. The challenge of working on them at the same time with both is 7075. You can only really do black, and they would consider, in the auto industry, they consider that mil spec. When you go at 7075 in black, it's a lot stronger of an anodize, but it's a production challenge because anodizing grows. So you have to oversize all your bores, which result when you make the raw material or the raw parts, they don't actually work because the tolerances are too sloppy. About a thou oversize. But when it comes to 7075, the growth factor triples to where it's 3 thou oversize, which means you have to oversize your holes by 6 thou because they're 2 walls. And it's fine to do. It's easy to anticipate for it. It's not easy to anticipate when you're trying to make both at the same time because you have half the parts you have to make a thou oversized, and the other parts you have to make 5 to 6 thou oversize. So tracking them and then doing whatever, it's not an easy task. You want to dedicate a batch to that, And 7075, you can only really do this black or this like dark gray color. You can't really get the color spectrum as you can with 6061.
So let's talk a little bit about, okay, so we're on this this first run. Without spilling the beans too much, are there going to be enough to go around? I mean, are we talking about 10 knives? I mean, are people going to be able to reasonably maybe get one of these? I'm sure they're going to go fast because it is such a unique design.
So the first batch consists of about 170 to 180. They will be dropped in increments. Currently have parts for about, well, I have all the parts to complete. I currently have 40 blades that Nick provided finished. And then at the moment we're waiting on black oxide. So hopefully the release will be in about a month.
And now when you say black oxide, we're talking about, are you talking about the hardware, I'm assuming?
Yeah, so the handles are blue or black. The blades are all sandblast tumbled. But all the hardware and everything else is different shades of gray, which aesthetically bothers me. Look, one, the pivots are, though the pivot on one side is fully machined in house and custom, because it's something I realized I had to do for an auto. You had to make a non-rotating pivot, or else it didn't work. So that's a bright machine finish. The screw on the other side is a polished screw, and then the button is a heat-treated grayish bronze color, and the back screws are black. So you got all different shades of grays and blacks going on. Something I didn't want to put out, so I'm black oxiding the other parts to match, so that all the parts would be black. And then the clip is sandblast stonewashed as to match the blade. We were originally going to go with DLC for all of that. Probably in the future we still would. DLCing small parts like that is pretty complicated because you have to make a lot of custom fixtures to retain and hold all the parts, which will delay the release quite a bit. And didn't see it needed to be done for just the hardware. Plus, it's a lot easier to get black oxide done. There's a local place I found, and you don't need to make fixtures to hold and retain the parts throughout the process.
Cool. All right. I think that's gonna look pretty. I think that's gonna look pretty spiffy. Black hardware is always I think that's popular all the way around. I don't think anybody prefers silver hardware necessarily over black hardware if it's available. So this run is gonna. This is going to drop, you guys are thinking of about a month. Hopefully no one's going to hold you to that specifically, but probably about a month.
Let's call it Blade Show time. So they're all, as far as the blades that I have here from Nick, I don't know when I'll receive more from him, but as far as the ones I have here, those are all assembled with the frames and everything to make sure everything works. Whenever I have the hardware that are now black oxide coated, just take out the existing hardware, put in the new blackened hardware, and they are considered ready to ship and market and sell and list and show the world.
You're going to shoot for, we're going to say Blade Show? Let's do that. Yeah? Okay. And these are going to be, so here's a question for the both of you that might be a little tricky. So what do you think the longevity of the project is? Is this a sprint run? Are you looking to make more of these? I know that's hard to tell because obviously, just to be practical, we haven't seen the sales of them yet, but is this something that you guys are looking forward to continuing to collaborate on in the future?
I'd say yes.
Yeah, I would say yes too. Nick and I we've been friends for a long time, and we actually work pretty well with each other. We know basically what to expect from each other, and we're pretty good at communicating. So, if the demand is asking for more, we'll definitely try to continue to push out more.
As I mentioned before, I'm sure make autos, and a good portion of my business will be shifting into automatics of the custom and production variety. So I plan on, if all goes well and it is an in-demand design and people want to see more of these, I do plan on making a full production version. And since Nick isn't full-time, that'll allow us for me to periodically send him out blades for him to grind so we can make the custom versions. And that way we don't have this lull in time like we just would have with it currently. So they could always be made, and Nick grinds them as he has time since he does have a full-time job. And we receive them and we do custom drops, production drops, and we'll see how it unfolds as time goes on.
I think that's super exciting. I know I've handled I handled the prototype and then the most recent assembly, and it's a great little auto. I gotta say, I would consider myself an automatic aficionado, and that is definitely, as you described, a Cali Legal that feels great in the hand because it's sort of girthy. It sits nicely, and when you fire the blade, you have something to hold on to, and the Tanto is very, very practical, and the Poon on top is certainly a signature.
I have to say Nick did a really good job in terms of the lockup. I mean, it's one thing that it looks, well built and strong. It's another thing when you actually fire it, you try to wiggle it, and it's just not budging at all. So it's the overall tolerance on it. Nick did a really good job in accommodating, in anticipating the oxidation growth, which is what he was talking about before.
Yeah, the oxidation growth on the trick part we're making production versus custom is custom comes with a lot of hand tuning. Production, you want to knock out all of the hand tuning as much as you can, and this mechanism, specifically a button lock auto or a button lock, where a frame lock you fit by hand. You set the detemp by hand, even in a lot of production environments. You set the lockup by hand in most production environments and tune it from there depending on the result you want. Where these either have to work off the machine or they don't. There's not really much tuning you can do. You can start grinding them to fit, then you start having wiggle and wobble. But the challenge there is I can machine one on the machine and it works perfectly, but there's processes it has to go through. And anodizing grows, making the hole shrink. When you heat treat stuff, depending on the steel, it might shrink or grow. If it grows, it doesn't lock up. If it shrinks, there's blade play. So essentially, if I take the parts off the machine that were made for finished knives, they don't work, and you don't know if they work until you until you heat treat them, until you anodize them, and a lot of money and time involved. And I spent a lot of time heat treating different steels and taking measurements and compensations. Every steel grows or shrinks differently. Anodizing, I sent out many batches one at a time to get anodized and test fit. From what I was explained to by my anodizer, for every second it is held in the solution, it changes the dimensions. So I had to send out multiple batches out for them to do, for me to take inspections on, and then we came up with a recipe that we used for my knives. And that recipe is in their books, and that's what they do for all my knives. I had to make custom fixtures and jigs for measuring the parts oversize, because I couldn't use parts to check. So I had to make custom things just to check them before they went through anodizing and heat treat. And I had the exact number of prototypes that I made until I was like, this has been perfected in my eyes for me, was 42 prototypes of the mechanism until I was like, okay, this is it. These are our numbers. This is what we're going with. And let's go run this batch.
Jeremiah, were you there when he had the scare that it didn't work?
Oh, yeah. We could have skipped that one. But yeah.
Like, what? It's not working. It's not,
so,
man.
So the blades come back from heat treat. At the time, I couldn't test the blades on the 180 we had, because the handles were still at anodizing. And I just was confident after 42 prototypes that I was like, I know my numbers. I've done all the tests. I've done all the measurements. These are going to work. So I sent the blades to Nick, and I didn't see him for a year and a half. So I never knew in a year and a half time when he had the blades, I had the finished handles. I'm like, my match should be good. They should work. And then he sends me the first 10 blades after a year and a half that are ground and finished and sharpened. And I go to assemble the first one, and it doesn't work. Something was wrong. Like, the lockup didn't engage in the closed position or open position. I was thinking, damn, the blades grew more. I knew the handles were good because I had them. They were all measured. The blades grew more than I anticipated. And I'm having a panic attack at the moment because I'm like, he has 180 blades. He already ground most of them. Like, oh my God. And yeah, so I calmed down for a second, and then I put on another blade, and it works perfectly. And then I'm like, okay, is this about to be like a 50-50 crapshoot here? And then I put on the other 9, they work perfectly. There's one dud, which is probably one of the first three that I machined out of the whole batch as I was making my adjustments for the tooling in the mill, because that you always have to do so. And I probably pushed this one through instead of putting it in the scrap bin. And out of 180 blades, the first one I touched was, of course, what should have been a scrap blade.
It wasn't even the first. Of all, if you do the math of all the odds, the 180 you sent me of the first batch that I grind, and then the first 10 that I said that the first one you grabbed was the dud. That was just
Yeah,
too
my
funny.
heart definitely sank there for a second there, and I was like, oh my god, I have to tell Nick that this might be a dead project. But that was just the one. Every other one I assembled has worked perfectly, open and closed, and that one was ground and fit, and it works. I want to see if this was a thing. How can I fix it? And in meticulous, the fixturing, essentially turning a Dremel into a router, and taking off a little bit at a time and assembling it 10 times and taking it apart 10 times. I got it to work perfectly, if it ever was to happen, but that one's going to be my personal one, as a remembrance of severe anxiety.
Yeah, that's you're absolutely right. The plausible, yeah, like astronomical. Like the fact that it was just the first one, like it could have been any blade, but to be the first one that you picked up is just, the odds are never in your favor on that one. That's
it's also the time. It's not like, oh, like I made this a month ago. They came in, okay, something's wrong. I make a thing. This is like, these were machined 2 years ago. He had these blades for a year and a half. I don't have fixtures anymore if I have to recut them. There's no tabs. I can't just go and recut them. Like, he's already put in. I did all the work. He did all the work. I know at that time, I know he rough ground all of them, and then he was going one by one to do finish grinds. But I was like, I might have to call Nick right now and be like, stop. We have to send all those. We have to test them all before you continue grinding. And then I checked the other blades. Everything was fine. But in those 5 minutes, my brain went through every possible horrible situation.
heart attack. Yeah, sometimes that happens. Check. That's what that comes down to. And in one way, right, that'll be your personal stab or sob, whatever you guys come up with. Yeah, I mean, moments like that, I think that's just part of the process. I assume it's knife making is a series of problems that are just waiting to be solved.
Manufacturing of any kind.
This is exciting. I think the reception thus far from people who have seen it and handle it is super positive, and I really like how we start with Nick Menevade's sort of pursuit for the most solid lockup, no lock rock, and we've come full circle to the button lock automatic, which is a collaboration, but in a lot of ways it's still after the same thing that the original stub was created for, which was to annihilate any kind of lock rock, and the automatic continues with the original DNA of a completely solid locking pocket knife. That's really great.
It's one of the I think it's one of the hashtags that I put in my posts, which is small but mighty. So,
well, this is going to be an epic year. I know, personally, I know that there are automatics creeping up from all corners of the industry, so I think this is actually going to be a pretty timely release for Blade Show.
And laws are changing too, so
that's
more
right.
states are becoming freer with the automatic.
Absolutely, yeah. It's going from Cali legal to like more than 25 state legal at this point. So it's gonna be great. Definitely looking forward to the Blade Show drop. As I'm sure that everybody else listening, it definitely will be. What's the best way to stay up to date with the project or with upcoming news? What's the best way to do that?
So as far as the auto goes, that's just my Instagram, NCC Knives, Nick's Instagram, the other Nick's Menevade. His Instagram is also Menevade, and my newsletter at nccknives.com. And I don't know what other platforms Nick uses.
Just my newsletter and Instagram mostly, and then I also post on Facebook too, but there's a bigger following on Instagram. So, whatever information I get from Nick, just relay that over to.
I'm pumped. As we lead out here, Menevade, is there an upcoming manual stub drop in the future? Where should we look for more of those if we're looking for a manual?
So I did finish a large batch of stuns, so they are available on the website for purchase. But the next, I'm in the middle of finishing up, the automatic knives that Nick and I are working on. But I will be starting work on the Gen 3.2 stubs. So I'm going to bring that back. I'm already counting parts. I have blades already machined. And so, but I'm going to be changing it up a little bit different. And this time I'm actually going to be including a pocket clip with it. So just changing up the overall look of it. But once I have finalized details, I'll be sharing that.
Okay, something to look forward to, present and future. I was assuming we'll see you in Atlanta at Blade Show.
I will try to make it.
Well, gentlemen, I think that covers it. It's been in the making for a little bit here,
for a long time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I missing anything that you wanted to add, Menevade?
No, again, thank you for having me. It's been great talking to you both and kind of talk a little bit about, about me. But no. I hope to see you guys soon and, continue to look forward to continue making more of these stub autos with Nick.
Thanks for coming on and joining us on the podcast here. This has been another intriguing episode of Bladeology. I'm gonna sign out first. This is Jeremiah from PVK. I will catch you kids on the next round.
And this is Nick from NCC Knives signing off.
And this is Nick from Meneve. I'll see you later.
All right. Thanks everybody. We'll catch you soon.